I can't forget that day, the day when everything in my seemingly peaceful life was turned upside down. As I stepped into the house after work, I immediately sensed that something was off. A large suitcase sat in the middle of the hallway, and the sound of laughter, echoing from the living room, sent a chill down my spine. I had never heard such sounds in this house, which was supposed to be my sanctuary. She said something about arranging the bedroom, I heard an older woman's voice, followed by a burst of giggles. I froze in place, unable to believe my ears. My heart began to race as I recognized who that voice belonged to. I walked into the living room and saw my husband, Brian, sitting comfortably chatting with his parents. They were seated on the sofa as if this were their home, not mine. His mother, Janet, looked up and flashed me a smug smile as I entered. "Oh, there you are, finally," she said, making no effort to hide her sense of entitlement. I turned to Brian, trying to keep my composure. "What's going on here?" I asked, my voice unsettlingly calm. Brian glanced up from his phone, momentarily surprised, but it passed in an instant. He shrugged and gave me a smile that made my skin crawl. "Oh, I forgot to tell you," he said casually. "My parents are going to stay here for a while." I was stunned. "Forgot to tell me?" I repeated, unable to believe what I was hearing. "You didn't even ask me? This is our house, Brian. Or rather, it's my house passed down to me by my grandparents. Don't you think that matters?" "Oh, Marissa, you're being dramatic," Brian replied, his tone annoyingly nonchalant. "It's just temporary, besides their family. Surely you understand that." My entire body trembled with anger. "Family?" I emphasized each syllable. "Brian, since the day we got married, your parents have treated me like an outsider. They don't respect me or our space. And now you let them move in without even telling me?" Brian sighed, as if I were the one causing trouble. "They just need a place to stay temporarily, Marissa. It's not a big deal. You're overreacting." Before I could respond, the doorbell rang. I hurried to the door and looked through the peephole. I couldn't mistake those faces. Brian's sister Vanessa had arrived, carrying 2 large suitcases of her own. The whole family was here now. All the patience I had left evaporated. I opened the door, letting Vanessa step inside, my frustration boiling beneath the surface. "You don't mind if I crash here for a bit, do you?" Vanessa asked, flashing a smile that had no trace of sincerity. I clenched my fists, struggling to contain the anger threatening to erupt. I knew that if I lost control now, things would only escalate further. There was no longer any doubt. I had lost control of my own home. The next morning, as I walked into the kitchen to prepare breakfast, the scene before me made me freeze in place. My mother-in-law, Janet, stood in front of the kitchen cabinets, rummaging through every shelf. My neatly organized spice jars and kitchen supplies were completely out of place. Without even acknowledging me, she picked up a jar of flour with a look of disdain and slammed it onto the counter. "Marissa, this kitchen needs to be reorganized," she declared, her tone leaving no room for negotiation. "Everything is a mess. I've tidied up a bit to make it more efficient, and I checked the fridge. Seriously, what are you feeding this family? All that processed food? That's not healthy at all." I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "Janet, this is my kitchen. I have my own way of organizing things. You don't need to worry about it." But she just scoffed, ignoring my words entirely. "Oh, Marissa, you need to learn how to manage a household better. The women in this family know how to run things properly. When I took care of Brian and Vanessa, everything was always perfect. Our home was never as disorganized as this." I pressed my lips together, feeling a surge of frustration rising within me. But before I could respond, Vanessa walked into the kitchen, yawning as she reached for the cereal box on the counter. "Is this the cheapest cereal you could find?" she asked sarcastically, shooting me a smirk before turning to her mother. "Mom, we really need to help her. I don't even know how Brian has put up with this for so long." My heart tightened at her words. This wasn't the first time they made me feel like an outsider in my own home. Every comment, every action seemed designed to undermine me, to make me feel like I wasn't good enough to care for this family. The following days became an endless nightmare. Janet interfered in every aspect of our household, moving furniture in the living room, dictating our daily schedule, and even changing my and Brian's diet to fit her idea of proper nutrition. Vanessa continued her passive-aggressive remarks whenever we crossed paths. I began to feel like a stranger in the very home I had once cherished. I couldn't take it anymore. But Brian didn't understand. He saw nothing wrong with their behavior. "They're just trying to help you," he said dismissively, as if I were the unreasonable one. "Can't you be a little grateful that they care?" That night Janet barged into the living room and casually suggested changing all the curtains because the current colors are just too dull. At that moment I knew I couldn't stay silent any longer. I stood up abruptly, clenching my fists to keep myself from exploding. "Enough!" I shouted, silencing the entire room. Janet and Vanessa turned to look at me in surprise, while Brian frowned in irritation. "Marissa, what are you doing?" he asked, his displeasure obvious. I met his gaze head-on, refusing to let fear or anger control me. "I've had enough, Brian. This is my house, but ever since your parents and Vanessa moved in, I haven't been respected. Every decision in this home is controlled by them. I can't live like this anymore." Janet let out a mocking laugh. "What are you talking about, Marissa? This is my son's house, and we're just trying to help. You're being overly sensitive." I turned to Brian, my gaze unwavering. "I want them to leave, Brian. If you won't make it happen, I will." The tension in the room was suffocating. This wasn't just a confrontation between me and my mother-in-law anymore. It was a moment that would decide whether our marriage could survive. After the intense standoff, Brian reluctantly agreed to talk to his mother and sister. However, I knew deep down that he wasn't truly on my side. The next day, Janet and Vanessa were still there, acting as if nothing had happened. They continued their condescending behavior, and I realized that if I wanted to reclaim control of my life, I would have to take matters into my own hands. A few weeks later, Brian informed me that he had a 2-week business trip to Houston. "I'll be gone for a couple of weeks. Don't make a big deal out of things with Mom and Vanessa while I'm away, okay?" he said, as if I were a child who needed to be reminded. I gave a dry chuckle, not wanting to argue anymore. I was tired of always being the one to compromise. After he left, the house felt even more stifling. Janet began meddling more deeply in the way I raised my son, Ethan. She changed his bedtime routine and forbade him from eating meals I had prepared. I felt trapped in my own home. But then, one quiet night as I was cleaning the kitchen, something happened that changed everything. Brian's laptop was open on the dining table, catching my attention. I wasn't usually a curious person, but an unsettling instinct drew me closer. On the screen was a string of emails, and just a few lines were enough to freeze me in place. The messages between Brian and a woman named Rachel revealed the truth. Their intimate words, their plans to meet during his business trips. It all became painfully clear. They had been seeing each other for a long time, and I had been completely in the dark. My hands trembled as tears streamed down my face. My entire body felt cold, as if the blood in my veins had stopped flowing. This wasn't just betrayal. It was the complete collapse of the trust I had placed in the man I once called my husband. I closed the laptop and sat down, forcing myself to take deep breaths. The pain stabbed through my chest, but another feeling quickly surfaced. Determination. I couldn't let them, Brian, Janet, and Vanessa, continue to control my life. I had endured enough. The next morning I called my lawyer. I explained the situation, detailing the infidelity and the ongoing conflict in my marriage. "I want to file for divorce as soon as possible," I said firmly, "and I want to ensure that I get full custody of Ethan." The lawyer listened and guided me through the next steps. After the call, I felt a slight sense of relief, though there was still much to be done. I decided to put the house up for sale. A place that was once my pride, but had now become a burden filled with painful memories. Next I called my younger brother Tyler, who had always been my emotional support. "Tyler, I need you," I said, my voice trembling with emotion. "Brian betrayed me, and I don't know how to get through this." Tyler immediately reassured me. "You're not alone, Marissa. We'll get through this together. You deserve a better life. He doesn't deserve to be with you anymore." His words were like a light at the end of a dark tunnel. I realized how much I needed my family. I decided to take some time to visit my parents and Tyler, giving Ethan the chance to be around those who truly loved us. I had to walk away from the past and prepare for a new future. But first, I had to face Brian. This time, I wouldn't be weak. I had a plan, and I would reclaim everything that was mine. The day of the court hearing finally arrived. I sat in the courtroom, feeling like time had slowed to a crawl. Brian sat across from me, his face tense but trying to appear calm. Janet and Vanessa were absent. perhaps because they knew there was no saving this situation anymore. My lawyer presented clear evidence of Brian's infidelity and the emotional strain I had endured in our marriage. Brian barely had any defense, offering only a few weak excuses. When the judge asked about the custody arrangement for Ethan, I stood up, my gaze firm and unwavering. Ethan needs a stable and safe environment to grow up in, I stated. I have been the one providing for and raising him all this time. I am seeking full custody. The judge nodded and turned to Brian. He tried to argue, but his voice lacked conviction. Ethan needs both parents in his life. I don't want to lose my son, he said. But no one in the room seemed moved by his words, especially after the evidence of his negligence had been presented. Finally, the court's decision was announced. I was granted full custody of Ethan, and Brian was ordered to provide financial support as outlined in the agreement. As the hearing concluded, I felt a mix of exhaustion and relief. I had fought hard to protect my son and our future, and now, things were beginning to fall into place. Brian approached me right after the hearing ended. "Marissa, please give me another chance," he pleaded, his voice desperate. "I made a mistake. We can start over, for Ethan's sake." I stood tall and met his eyes. "Brian, your mistake wasn't just a one-time thing," I said, my voice cold but calm. "You didn't just betray me, you hurt our entire family. There's nothing left to save. I gave you many chances, and you wasted all of them." He sighed and lowered his head, as if finally realizing he had lost everything. But I no longer felt pity or sadness. I had moved beyond that phase. Ethan and I deserved a better life, far away from those who had caused us pain. Brian walked away, and in the following weeks I heard about the difficulties he faced. His company found out about the divorce and his affair, costing him several key contracts. His family's social connections began to crumble. Janet and Vanessa, who had once been proud and critical, became the subjects of gossip. People distanced themselves from them, and the admiration and respect they once received were gone. Janet attempted to contact me several times, but I didn't respond. I had no reason to remain tied to them. The past was over, and I was now focused on the future for myself and Ethan. One late afternoon, Ethan and I sat together on the porch at Tyler's house. He giggled as I told him cheerful stories about his grandparents. Watching the light in his eyes, I knew I had made the right decision. He needed to grow up surrounded by genuine love, not in a toxic environment. Tyler came out with 2 glasses of iced tea and sat beside me. "You did it, Marissa," he said, pride shining in his eyes. "Now it's time for you to enjoy your new life." I smiled, feeling peace radiate through me. "Yes," I replied softly. "This is a new chapter for Ethan and me. Nothing can hold us back anymore." The sunset bathed us in warm colors, carrying with it the promise of brighter days ahead. I had reclaimed my freedom, strength, and hope for the future. Mine and Ethan's. After the court proceedings were over and the divorce finalized, I knew I needed to make a big change for our lives. Keeping the old house, filled with painful memories, no longer made sense. I quickly completed the sale and moved with Ethan closer to my family, where I found warmth and support from those who truly loved us. My parents and Tyler helped me find a small, cozy apartment on a quiet street, not far from the family cafe I had been a part of during my youth. Named Bliss Haven, the cafe had been opened by my parents over 20 years ago. I had grown up surrounded by the aroma of freshly roasted coffee and warm baked goods. It was always a place of peace for me whenever life felt overwhelming. Now, I decided to return to managing the cafe, seeing it as a way to start fresh. The first days were not easy. I had to balance work and caring for Ethan. He had just turned 3, full of energy and curiosity. But every time I saw his joyful smile, I knew I couldn't give up. Each morning I woke up early to prepare for the day. I reorganized the cafe, changing curtains and decorating shelves with children's books for customers to read. I wanted Bliss Haven to be more than just a place for coffee. I wanted it to be a haven for those seeking a moment of peace and connection. Old customers gradually returned and new ones came through word of mouth. Some asked about my story, but I would smile softly and avoid going into details. I didn't want to dwell on the past. I was focused on the present and everything it had to offer. One Saturday morning, as the cafe buzzed with activity, I saw Tyler walk in with his girlfriend. He waved and smiled when he saw me, busy making coffee for the customers. "You never take a break, do you?" he teased, though pride was evident in his eyes. Well, someone has to work to provide for Ethan, I replied with a laugh as I handed a freshly made latte to a customer. After work, Tyler and I sat down in a corner of the cafe to catch up. Ethan was happily playing with wooden blocks in the children's area. Watching my son, I felt deeply grateful for everything I had. You've come a long way, Marissa, Tyler said, placing a hand on my shoulder. You're not the same weak woman you were when you were with Brian. You're so much stronger now. I nodded, knowing that was true. The challenges and pain I had endured had shaped me. I no longer feared the unknown. I had learned how to stand strong and protect what mattered most: Ethan, and the freedom I now cherished. Life continued to move forward, but now I no longer felt weighed down by the expectations of others. I could make decisions on my own terms. In the late afternoons, I would often take walks with Ethan around the neighborhood, watching the sunset through the trees. We laughed and enjoyed those small, precious moments together. The cafe continued to thrive, becoming a beloved part of the community. Customers came not just for the coffee, but for the comfort and warmth that I had always envisioned. I knew I was on the right path. Starting this new chapter of my life, I felt a powerful sense of hope that bright days awaited Ethan and me, and this time I wouldn't let anyone or anything hold us back. Over time, the emotional wounds began to heal. Each day I felt stronger, capable of facing life's challenges. Ethan grew up healthy and happy, surrounded by the love of me and our family. Seeing him laugh and play, I knew everything I had endured was worth it. One autumn afternoon, Ethan and I went to the park near our home. The trees had turned vibrant shades of yellow and orange, creating a beautiful natural scene. Ethan ran around, his little feet crunching through the dry leaves, making a pleasant rustling sound. I sat on a bench, taking a deep breath to savor the crisp, peaceful air, something I hadn't truly felt in a long time. "Look, Mommy!" Ethan shouted, holding up a star-shaped leaf. His eyes sparkled with excitement. I smiled and waved him over. "That's amazing, Ethan. I'm going to keep this leaf as a memory," I said, taking it from his tiny hands. We laughed together, the sound blending with the gentle breeze. Our new life had become much more stable. The cafe business continued to grow, providing enough income for Ethan and me to live comfortably. I no longer worried about financial pressures or gossip from others. Most importantly, I had found myself again. A strong, independent woman, no longer shackled by the ghosts of the past. One evening while I was cleaning up after work, my phone rang. The caller ID displayed Brian's name. I stared at it for a moment, but instead of feeling anxious or hurt, I felt indifferent. After a brief hesitation, I decided to answer. "Hello, Marissa," he said, his voice low and slightly hesitant. "I just wanted to check in on you and Ethan. Are you both doing okay?" "We're fine, Brian. And you?" I responded, keeping my tone calm. Not so great," he admitted with a sigh. "I know I've made too many mistakes. I don't expect your forgiveness, but I really hope you're happy." I was silent for a moment before replying. "Thank you. Ethan and I are doing well, and that's what matters most to me. I hope you can find a new path forward too." The brief conversation ended without any sense of regret. I knew with certainty that I had closed that painful chapter of my life. The past no longer had any power over me. In the following months, life became busier but more meaningful. I got involved in more community activities, expanding the cafe's services by hosting children's reading events and charity fundraisers for families in need. The local community began to see Bliss Haven as an essential part of their lives, and I felt proud to have created such a positive space. One weekend morning, as I stood behind the counter making coffee, a regular customer smiled and greeted me. "Thank you, Marissa. This place really feels like home," she said, her eyes full of gratitude. I smiled back. That's exactly what I wanted. Moments later, Ethan came into the cafe after his art class, running toward me and hugging my leg. "Mommy, I made a big painting today," he exclaimed proudly. "Then tonight we'll hang it on the wall," I replied, bending down to kiss his forehead. Ethan giggled, and I realized that his happiness was my greatest motivation. The sun rose higher, casting warm rays through the cafe's windows. I stood there, taking in the view, my heart filled with hope. We had come through the darkest days, and now a bright future lay ahead. We would keep moving forward, strong and full of faith in life. Marissa's story is one of overcoming pain, loss, and rediscovering herself. From the wounds of betrayal and the oppression of her in-laws, she rose to take back control of her life. Marissa not only protected her son Ethan but also built a successful community cafe where she found joy and connection. Her journey serves as a testament to the inner strength of the human spirit, showing that with perseverance and belief, we can overcome hardships and achieve the happiness we deserve. What do you think about Marissa's journey of overcoming hardships? Do you empathize with the decisions she made? Share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to follow the channel to discover more heartwarming stories about life and family.